I am Walter Higgins, 68 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed I had done everything right as a father. I built a chain of hardware stores across Ohio from a single cinder block building in Dayton into 14 locations across 3 states, and I did it so my son would never have to know the kind of hunger I knew growing up. But last Thursday, sitting perfectly still in the dark on the floor of my own garage, I listened to my son and his wife discuss, in calm and pleasant voices, exactly how many weeks I had left to live and how they planned to spend the $11 million they'd collect once I was gone. Before I tell you how I found out and what I did about it, let me know where you're listening from tonight, friend. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and settle in, because this one still makes my hands shake when I think about it. For 2 months before that night in the garage, I'd been sick in a way no doctor could explain. Mornings brought a deep, bone-level nausea, a metallic taste that lingered no matter how much coffee I drank, and a strange numbness that crept into my fingertips by afternoon. I went to my longtime physician, Dr. Neary, 3 separate times. Blood work normal. EKG normal. He mentioned stress, mentioned age, mentioned that grief does strange things to a body. Since my wife Carol had passed 18 months earlier, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. A man doesn't want to think the illness eating him alive might have a reason behind it. My son Dale had started visiting more often after Carol died, which I took, foolishly, as comfort. He'd bring his wife, Renee, a pharmaceutical sales rep with a warm smile and an easy laugh, and they'd sit with me at the kitchen table Carol used to set every Sunday, and they'd ask how I was feeling, and they'd tell me not to push myself so hard at the stores anymore. Renee started bringing me a thermos of bone broth twice a week, insisting it would help build my strength back up. I drank it gratefully. I thought I was lucky. I thought I was the rare father whose only son had grown into a good man. The night everything cracked open started with something small. I'd gone out to the garage after dinner to find a torque wrench, meaning to fix the loose step on the back porch before winter set in. My phone was inside on the counter, and through the old air vent that runs between the garage and the mudroom, a vent that's carried every conversation in that kitchen for 30 years, though I'd forgotten it was there, I heard Renee's voice, low and businesslike, say my name. I froze with my hand on the workbench. He's not going to last past Thanksgiving at this rate, she said. The levels I'm giving him would have killed most men by now. His heart's just stubborn. I did not breathe. I do not think I breathed for a full minute. Dale's voice came next, and it wasn't grief I heard in it. It was irritation. Well, speed it up then. The Cincinnati lease is due in 6 weeks, and I don't have it. If the stores go to me before the bank forecloses on my restaurant, I can fold the debt into the business, and nobody ever looks twice. You said 2 months, Dale. It's been 2 months. I said 2 months when I thought your stuff worked fast. Just up the dose in the broth. He drinks the whole thermos every time, doesn't he? Trusting old fool. I stood in that cold garage with a torque wrench still in my hand, and I understood, all at once, the way you understand a diagnosis, that my son was killing me for the stores I'd spent 40 years building, and that his wife had been dosing me with something twice a week out of a thermos I drank gratefully, thinking myself lucky. I want to tell you I did something dramatic that night. I didn't. I put the wrench down, quiet as I could, and I walked back into my own house through the side door, and I looked my son in the eye when he asked where I'd been, and I said the porch step, just checking the porch step, and my voice did not shake even though everything inside me had come apart like wet paper. That's the part nobody understands until it happens to them, friend. The betrayal doesn't knock you down right away. It sits in your chest like a stone, and you keep pouring coffee, and you keep nodding along, because some animal part of you knows that the moment they see you know, you become a problem they need to solve faster. I did not drink the broth again. I poured it down the kitchen sink the next morning while Renee's car was still in my driveway, watched it swirl away, and refilled the thermos with plain water from the tap, so the weight would feel the same in my hand when she checked. I don't know if she checked. I didn't care to find out. What I cared about was buying myself time to think. The following week, I told Dale and Renee that Dr. Neary wanted to run more extensive blood work at a specialist in Columbus, and that I'd be staying at a hotel near the clinic for a few days to make the early appointments easier. This was a lie. What I actually did was drive 2 hours in the opposite direction to a private forensic toxicology lab I'd found through an old friend from the Rotary Club, a retired detective named Frank Delgado, who still had contacts in places most people don't think to look. The lab was nothing like a doctor's office. No magazines, No soft music, just a woman behind reinforced glass who took the sealed thermos I handed her, without asking a single question about why a 68-year-old man was driving 2 hours to have broth tested for poison. I suppose in her line of work, that wasn't an unusual Tuesday. 4 days later, Frank called me himself instead of letting the lab send the results. That told me something before he said a word. "Walter," he said, "you need to sit down." The broth I'd saved from before I dumped it, I'd kept one sealed jar in my truck. Untouched, carried elevated levels of colchicine, a compound normally used to treat gout, lethal in the wrong doses, and nearly impossible for a standard autopsy to flag because it mimics the symptoms of ordinary organ failure in the elderly. Frank explained it slow and careful, the way he must have once explained things to grieving families. Renee's job gave her access to pharmaceutical samples most people never see. She would have known exactly how much to give a man my age, and exactly how long it would take, and exactly how invisible it would look on paper. "This isn't amateur hour," Frank told me. "Whoever's doing this knows precisely what she's doing." I sat in my truck in that lab's parking lot for a long time after I hung up the phone, watching my own hands on the steering wheel, waiting for them to start shaking. They didn't. Something in me had gone very cold and very still, the way the water goes still right before it freezes over. "I want you to understand something about me before I go further, friend. I am not a violent man. I have never so much as raised my voice at an employee in 40 years of running those stores. But when I sat in that parking lot, I did not think about calling the police first. I thought about my son's face across that kitchen table, nodding along while I talked about missing his mother, while he was counting down the weeks until I joined her. So I made a decision. I would not go to the police with half a story. I would build the whole thing, brick by brick, the way I built every one of those 14 stores. And I would make certain that when it came down so completely there would be no lawyer clever enough to talk my son out from under it. I started wearing a hidden recorder clipped inside my shirt pocket every time Dale or Renee came by. Old-fashioned, the kind Frank still had lying around from his detective days, voice-activated, no blinking lights to give it away. I let myself look sicker than I was. I let my hands tremble when Renee handed me the thermos, now filled with nothing but water and a little chicken bouillon for flavor, so she'd have no reason to suspect I'd stopped drinking the real thing. I coughed more than I needed to. I told them my vision was blurring some days, which wasn't true, but it gave Dale an opening he couldn't resist. That opening came 2 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, when Dale showed up with a lawyer I'd never met. He's a slick young man named Preston Voss, who talked fast and smiled faster. They spread papers across my kitchen table, Carol's kitchen table, and Dale took my hand like he was comforting me and told me that given my declining health, it would be so much easier on everyone if I signed over power of attorney now, before things got worse, so he could manage the stores and my finances without the stress of watching me struggle through it. I signed nothing. I told them I needed to think. That doctor, Neary, wanted one more round of tests before I made decisions that big, and I watched something flicker behind Dale's eyes, not concern, not patience, calculation. He was recalculating his timeline, the way you'd recalculate a route around traffic. That recorder in my shirt pocket caught every word of it. It caught Preston Voss explaining, once Dale walked him to his car, that the power of attorney paperwork was drafted broadly enough to let Dale liquidate store assets without further signatures, and it caught Dale laughing and saying his father wouldn't notice until it was already done. I brought the recordings to Frank, and Frank brought them to a friend still working at the county prosecutor's office, a serious young woman named Detective Ruiz, who listened to 40 minutes of tape without saying a single word, and then looked up at me with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life. Not pity, something closer to respect. "Mr. Higgins," she said, "we have enough here for attempted murder and financial exploitation of an elder. But I need you to understand something. The moment we move on this, your son is going to know you knew. There's no clean way to arrest people you love." I told her I understood. I did not. Not fully. Not yet. You never do until you're standing in the middle of it. Here is where the story slows down, friend, because this is the part that nearly broke me, and I think it's the part you need to hear most, because I know some of you have sat across a table from someone you love, wondering if the warmth in their eyes is real or something they learned to perform. I spent the better part of a month playing a dying man for my own son. I lost real weight, because the fear does that to a body whether you want it to or not. I let him see me struggle to stand from a chair. I let Renee hold my elbow going up the porch steps, And I said thank you, and some small stupid part of me, even knowing what I knew, wanted her to mean it. That's the cruelest thing about a betrayal like this. It doesn't just take your money or your health. It makes you doubt every kindness you ever received from the person doing it, going all the way back. There was a night, close to the end, when Renee came by alone, carrying a fresh thermos, and stood in my doorway a little too long, asking to come in and heat it up herself. I told her I had a fever and needed to lie down, blocking the door with my arm, my heart slamming so hard I was certain she could hear it. She studied my face for a long moment, the way you'd study a lock you weren't sure you trusted, and then she smiled and told me to feel better, and left the thermos on the step. Detective Ruiz had that one tested within the hour. Same compound, higher dose than before. Dale hadn't been exaggerating when he told her to speed things up. I want to tell you about a man named Samuel Okafor, because he matters to this story more than almost anyone, and I think about him every single day now. Samuel ran a small watch and clock repair counter inside the flea market on Route 4, the kind of place most people drive past without noticing. I'd gone there on impulse one Tuesday morning, before all of this started, to get a battery replaced in Carol's old wristwatch, the one I'd started wearing myself after she passed because it made me feel close to her. Samuel took the watch, opened the back casing to check the battery, and went very still. "Sir," he said quietly, "who gave you this?" I told him it had belonged to my late wife. He turned the watch toward me under his jeweler's lamp, and inside the casing, tucked beneath the battery compartment in a way no factory would ever install it, was a small, absorbent pad, faintly discolored, that Samuel said his instincts told him did not belong there. He'd seen something similar years before, he told me, working a repair counter in Lagos, in a case involving a family inheritance dispute that had ended very badly for an elderly client he hadn't been able to save in time. He recognized the smell. "I want to be honest with you, friend. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. I told him it was probably old adhesive from the factory, but Samuel refused to hand the watch back to me until I promised to have it tested, and he wrote his number on the back of a business card, and he told me something I have not been able to shake since. He said, 'A man who loves you does not need to hide anything inside something he gives you.' Carol's watch, it turned out, was clean. The pad inside was old glue residue, nothing more. A false alarm from a repairman with sharper instincts than the situation called for that particular day. But Samuel's warning planted something in me. It made me pay closer attention. It made me notice, 2 weeks later, the way Renee watched me drink from that thermos, a little too intently. The way Dale's questions about my health had started arriving with the rhythm of a man checking on an investment rather than a father's condition. Samuel didn't hand me the answer, friend. He handed me the willingness to ask the question. And when everything else in this story came crashing down around me, I went back to that flea market counter and I told him what his instinct had led me to uncover, and I watched a small, humble man nearly sit down on the floor from the shock of it. I financed a proper storefront for Samuel Okafor within a month of everything settling. He didn't ask me to. I insisted. Some debts you pay because you owe them, and some you pay because the world needs more people like that in it, and rewarding them is the only way to say so. Detective Ruiz and I settled on a plan. Dale had scheduled a family dinner for that Friday, ostensibly to celebrate my improved test results, which I'd fed him through a false report. Frank helped me arrange with a sympathetic contact at the clinic. In truth, it was designed to get both Dale and Renee in one room, with the power of attorney papers present, so they'd incriminate themselves one final time on tape while officers waited outside. I sat at that kitchen table Friday evening, the same table where Carol used to serve pot roast every Sunday for 30 years, and I watched my son pour me a glass of wine with his own hands, smiling, telling me how relieved he was that the doctors had found nothing serious after all. I watched Renee squeeze my shoulder and say she was so glad, so genuinely glad, and some part of me still wanted to believe she meant it, even then, even with the recorder running warm against my chest. "Dad," Dale said, sliding the papers across the table, "now that you're feeling stronger, maybe we table the power of attorney talk. No rush." And there it was, the recalibration. The performance of a devoted son who no longer needed urgency because he thought his poison was still working on schedule underneath the surface, patiently, invisibly, and my apparent recovery was just a good week before the real decline resumed. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that, because I think it matters. I did not scream. I did not throw the wine glass. I did not do any of the things you might imagine yourself doing in that moment. I simply set my fork down, and I said, quiet and steady, Dale, I know about the Colchicine. I know about the Cincinnati lease. I know about Preston Voss's paperwork. And I know Renee brought a stronger dose to my door 11 days ago, and I turned her away with a lie. The silence that followed was the longest silence I have ever sat inside of. Dale's face didn't crumble the way you'd expect from television. It went blank. And then calculating, the same look I'd seen the night he told Renee to speed things up. And he opened his mouth to say something, some explanation already forming, when the front door opened and Detective Ruiz walked in with 2 uniformed officers behind her. Renee tried to run. She made it as far as the mudroom before an officer caught her arm. Dale just sat there, staring at the papers on the table, at the wine he'd poured with his own steady hand, saying my name over and over. Dad, Dad. Like the word still meant something he could use. I looked at my son in handcuffs at Carol's kitchen table, and I searched myself for some remaining thread of the love I'd carried for him since the day he was born, and I found it was still there, smaller and scarred over, but there, because you don't stop loving your child just because he stopped deserving it. What I did not find was any desire to protect him from what came next. You didn't need to do this, he said quietly as they walked him out. I would have taken care of you. You were taking care of me straight into the ground, son, I told him, and I let the door close behind him without another word. The trial took the better part of a year. Renee's pharmaceutical company cooperated fully once the investigation reached them, horrified at how she'd used her access, and the evidence Frank and I had assembled left almost nothing for their lawyers to argue with. Dale received 19 years for attempted murder and elder financial exploitation. Renee received 22, the extra time reflecting the deliberate, medical precision of what she'd done. The Cincinnati restaurant, it turned out, wasn't the only debt he'd been drowning in. There were others, gambling debts mostly, going back 3 years, hidden behind a life that had always looked, from the outside, like quiet success. I still own all 14 stores. I've slowly started handing more of the daily operations to a young store manager named Theo, a kid Carol would have liked, sharp and honest in a way that reminds me there are still people in this world who build things instead of waiting to inherit them. I visit Samuel's new storefront most Tuesdays now, just to sit and talk while he works, and sometimes I bring him coffee. And sometimes he fixes a watch for me that doesn't even need fixing, just so we have a reason to sit together a while longer. He tells me I saved his career that day. I tell him he saved my life, and we go back and forth about it until one of us laughs and changes the subject. I still eat dinner most Sundays with my niece, Carol's sister's daughter, a school teacher named Abby who drove 4 hours the week everything came out just to sit with me and make sure I ate something. She never asked me for a dime, never once mentioned the stores or the estate. Just showed up with a casserole and sat at that same kitchen table, and I think about the difference between the people who show up because they love you and the people who show up because they're counting the days until you're gone. And I don't think I'll ever stop noticing that difference for the rest of my life. Some nights I still hear that vent between the garage and the kitchen carrying voices that aren't there anymore. I've thought about sealing it shut 100 times, and every time I decide against it, because that vent saved my life, friend, and I've come to believe you don't wall off the thing that saved you, no matter how much it still echoes. If there's one thing I want you to carry out of this story tonight, it's this. Love doesn't need a locked door or a hidden compartment. If someone in your life is handing you something wrapped in secrecy, in urgency, in a rush to get your signature before you think too hard, that isn't devotion. That's a countdown clock, and you have every right to stop it. Trust the quiet feeling in your chest before you trust the smile across the table. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. If it moved you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments, and I'll read every single one. Take care of yourselves, and take care of the people who show up for you without ever asking what's in it for them. I'll see you in the next story.